which is Dominic.
Thank you very much, Sue. My name is Dominic Manning. I'm the chair of the Rother Green Party, but I'm also a local architect, so I'd like to think I know a little bit about home insulation and the like. I owe gratitude to Mike Pepler of the Citizens Advice 1066 for preparing the slideshow that you're going to see this evening. What I'm showing you is not the total slideshow, which would have gone on for longer, so I'm not going to be talking about tariffs, and I'm not going to be talking about financial advice. But if you're interested in that, please get in touch with me, or even preferably get in touch with Citizens Advice 1066, because there is a lot of financial help available at the moment. I just want to give you a brief outline of what fuel poverty is. The purpose today is to really talk about winter readiness and how we can save on energy bills while staying warm in our homes. And that's good for our health as well. So fuel poverty is basically a combination of high energy prices, inadequate houses which are poorly insulated and badly maintained, and thirdly also high energy prices combined with low household income. So it's when people get squeezed and have to make difficult decisions as to whether to heat the house or to feed their children or to pay the rent and such like. So if we can just go to the next slide. So it's important to stay warm in the winter. The moment the temperature drops below a certain point, it can actually get really, really dangerous for your health. So at 16 degrees or less, you start having breathing problems, or one can have breathing problems. At 14 degrees or less, heart problems can arise, and lower than that, at 9 degrees, you can even have hypothermia. But there are also other aspects to not being adequately warm in the house. You can have mental health issues in terms of anxiety and depression. So it can, and also if you've got existing health conditions, it can exacerbate them. So it's really very important to try and stay warm as best we can throughout the winter. Next slide. So before we move on to the whole notion of staying warm, it is important to think about ventilation as well, because there was that very tragic case you would have seen in the news of a 2-year-old child dying of black mould in the home. Condensation creates damp and mould and can harm health. It can also damage property and possessions. So it's important not to block up vents and fans just because you think it's going to keep the place warmer. There's a balance to these things. In particular, it's important to ventilate rooms where you are drying closing doors. Next. So I want to differentiate between fundamentally two things you can do. You can either not spend any money and change your behaviour, or you can try and achieve energy efficiency, but that might require some investment in terms of monetary outlay. I want to start off by talking about change of behaviour. So if we can just move on, and again, the next slide. So the key thing really to say is just turn down the thermostat. It's not necessary to walk around in a t-shirt at this time of year. Many people think it is. 18 degrees can feel cold to some people, but it can make a huge saving if you just turn down the thermostat from 20 to 18. It can save in excess of £300 a year. So as what you mentioned, put on more layers, so just adding another big jumper can save in excess of £150. I mean, obviously the two they go hand in hand. Obviously the colder it is, the more layers that you want to have on. One of the things that many people don't realise is you can actually adjust the flow temperature of your boiler. So if you set that down, you can save money. And an important thing to remember there is when the plumber comes out to adjust the boiler, they will set it back to the heat level that the manufacturers are recommending. But there's no harm in setting that temperature down slightly. I suggest you go to that website that Mike has put on, which is Money Saving Boiler Challenge, to look how to do that. The other thing to do is obviously if you're in a house with multiple rooms and there are rooms you're not using, either turn down the radiators or you can turn them off in those rooms. Closing curtains at night or shutters, I can save up to 15% of heat. I mean, if you've got thermal curtains, that helps more, of course. And then just use the timer settings on your thermostat. If you've got programmable thermostat, use that. Work out how to do so. There's no point in heating your house in the middle of the night. You don't need the heat at that time. Make sure you have the heat at the right time. And then stop using electric radiators. Now this is I only found this the other day actually, much to my embarrassment, because I'm in a situation where I work from home. I've got a little room and I've been turning on my electric heater, but actually electricity is almost 3.5 times more expensive than gas is per kilowatt hour. So if we're not looking at climate change, but we're just looking at cost, it's still more efficient to use your central heating and take the other measures than just having an electric heater on. It's also worth pointing out that we've probably seen lots of adverts for all these electrical gizmos for heating rooms. Basically, with electricity, you get heat out of it. They're all 100% efficient, give or take. It's just a different way of putting the heat into the room. So don't be conned by some of these things. Be critical of what they're doing. And then just move furniture away from radiators. You don't need to be heating the furniture, you want to be heating the space. So then just moving on, and the next one. So we're now looking at water and appliances. So the one we've just been looking at is the space heating. But in terms of hot water and appliances, so just air dry laundry instead of using a tumble dryer. Ideally, air stuff outdoors when you can. This time of year, not possible. Just turn off standby appliances. On the whole, electrical appliances are getting much better, so they're using much less energy now. If you buy something new nowadays, it's using a lot less standby energy than it might have done 20 years ago, but nevertheless, it's worth considering. Instead of having a bath, have a shower. If you're having a shower, don't spend too long in the shower, 4 minutes is ample. Only use a dishwasher when it's full. It sounds obvious, but actually it's sometimes not that obvious. So just think about things like that. Turning off lights in empty rooms. We all know people who don't do that, and it's very annoying. Just think about turning lights off. Put a lid on saucepan while cooking. Makes sense. You're keeping the energy where it needs to be. Don't overfill the kettle. Only put in as much as you need. Wash clothes below 40 degrees and only use a washing machine when it's full as well. And then, if we can then move on, so this is now energy efficiency, and we're talking about spending money on stuff. These things don't cost a lot of money. So if you've got a hot water tank, you can add more insulation to it, so even if it's pre-insulated, there's no harm in adding additional insulation. I'm sure that Kenny's going to talk more about that. Use a low-flow shower head. Draft proofing is really important. If you've got an open fireplace, that's basically a huge vent to the outside. You're just heating all the air is going straight out. Put in a chimney balloon or do something else to prevent that heat from escaping. Doors, loft hatch, letterbox, all draft proofing. Windows and doors, have them draft proof. Install radiator reflectors throughout the house. It doesn't sort of save a huge amount, but it just all adds up. So do that if you can. And then insulate water pipes and repair dripping hot water tap. It's all fairly common sense things which don't cost a lot of money. And this is just to do with other ways of saving energy. Use a slow cooker from time to time if you've got one. Replace old light bulbs with LED light bulbs. And then use a microwave instead of a conventional oven. All of that helps. And then these are the bigger things, and I think, Ken, you're going to be talking about this a lot more, but I'll just quickly rattle through them. So we've got cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, solid wall insulation, suspended wooden floor insulation, double glazing to replace single glazing where applicable, and there are other things, as I said, Ken will go through this. And then, so heat the human, not the home. This isn't ideal. In an ideal world, we'd have thermal comfort in the home, but if push comes to shove, it's better to heat the person rather than having no heating at all. So adding multiple layers, and we're talking perhaps even more than a jumper. But don't use cotton, because the moment you start sweating, that moisture is then a problem as well. Hot meals, hot drinks, and then physical activity. Again, that's not possible for everybody, but just moving around keeps you warm. I've got a sit-stand desk, so just by standing, you're using more energy. and that helps keep warm as well. It's quite surprising. Apparently it's equivalent to about 4 marathons a year just by standing instead of sitting down. I didn't know that. I don't sit all the time, stand all the time, but it's nice to have. Hot water bottles, use them, but be careful with boiling water. Wee bags, use them, but don't microwave them for too long because it's a fire risk. And electric blanket, but check it's safe and not too old. So those are the things we can do, and that ends my talk.
When trying to save energy, insulate your building more. Any ideas?
Loft.
No.
Draft.
No.
Double glazing.
No.
You said it before.
Open window shut.
No. The single most important thing is that you keep the building dry. Wet building fabric is not energy efficient, so you must keep the head of the building dry, so often that's the gutters failing, and the feet of the building dry, and often that's rising damp. So what nobody does, except perhaps me, occasionally, or not anymore actually because I don't have gutters, but go out when it's raining heavily, go out and check that your gutters aren't overflowing and soaking the wall with water, because if you've got wet walls, you're not only going to get, probably, depending on what your wall is, get dampness inside the house, which isn't good for you, but you're reducing the energy efficiency of the wall. So keep the building fabric dry is the first thing, and so many people ignore it. So, the simplest thing, who said draft proofing? Yes. Usually the simplest thing to do and the first thing to do, doors and windows, and seal up the letterbox, seal up the loft hatch, for example. Get draft from the loft, because the loft, if you've got a pitch roof, the loft should be ventilated. Right, so we then move on to loft insulation, is usually the next thing to do. Most people will have 100 millimetres, 4 inches of probably fiberglass. We should really be looking to, I would prefer if everybody ripped out the fiberglass and put it to the tip, took it to the tip, because it's not a very nice material to handle or to breathe in at all. But we should have as close to 300 millimetres or a foot of fibrous insulation in the loft. That will get us to a very good low standard, but because it's the easiest thing to do, we should be aiming for that. Keep it back from the eaves, because we need to keep cross ventilation from the eaves throughout the loft. Keep the loft, the space above the insulation, cold and well ventilated. Otherwise, and I went to a house this morning where someone had stuffed the insulation down between the rafters at the eaves, and she was getting dampness in the walls, her external walls, and she was getting white deposits, salt deposits, where there'd been condensation forming on the rafters. You could see it quite clearly. And so she's got to get someone, this was a very low pitch roof, she's got to get someone in there to pull that out. Somebody put it in incorrectly. So that's really important that you keep the cross ventilation. You have to take care of cables. When you insulate, you're keeping the warmth in the cables, because electric cables produce heat. So what I did in my 30s house was to cover the cabling with half-round gutter, plastic gutter. You could form other things sometimes of your own to keep some air around, but if you're using LED lighting, that requires much less energy, and I think it's less of a concern. I don't really know whether technical limits are on that, because with old lighting, like 60 watt, 100 watt bulbs, there'd be much more energy demand, and the cables can heat up more. So I think with LED lighting, which can just be a few watts these days, it's probably okay. But that's something I really do need to look into a bit more, actually. So after lofts, floors might come next, and of course they fall into the categories of solid or suspended. Solid floors are a problem. If you've got a concrete floor, there's not much scope to insulate it. All I can say is that you don't lose a great deal of heat through the floor, even if it's concrete, except at the perimeter of the building. You can, if you've got enough height in your room, you could perhaps add an inch of insulation, something like Celotex, this material here, or that piece, yeah, that's 2 inches, but you can add, this is a coping product to Celotex, something like that, a rigid board, you could add that over your boards if you have enough height, you don't mind losing a little bit of height off your door openings. If you like, there are also plenty of other things like cork that you could add onto the floor and put another layer of boarding on. But that's not so easy with solid floors. Suspended floors, timber floors, you're into whether you can get under the floor, whether you can get access or not, and whether you're up to crawling about underneath the suspended floor. I did my 30s house and there was about that much space under it, and I crept about under there, brushed and vacuumed it all out first, and then I put, it was actually rock wool quilt that I put in. I've got some somewhere here, but I'll show you at the end. Put underneath, and then I put battens across underneath, hammered them in to hold the insulation in place. Of course, you can always then, in my son's house, I did that underneath, and I put another inch of Celotex on the top because he had enough headroom on the doors and openings. So there are various other ways that you can do that. It depends on how your floor is made up. But that does take a bit of work. It's much more difficult than loft space to do. Walls comes next, really. Now this gets a bit tricky because it depends on the construction of your house. If you've got cavity walls, you can of course inject cavity. I wouldn't recommend polystyrene beads because gaps can form between where they're squirted in one place and another place, and cracks can occur, so they don't always join up, and then you can get water penetration. I think that's pretty much gone out of use now. Have you come across any? I haven't seen it done for some while. So mineral wool is a good thing, rock wool is a good thing to use in cavities, if you can get that done. But I would suggest don't use cavity fill in very exposed areas. Of course, if you're on the seafront, you definitely wouldn't do it, or if you're on the top of the hill, you wouldn't do it. The best place to insulate walls is on the outside, in my opinion, because you keep the mass of the building inside the insulation. So when you're warming up the house, the mass absorbs some of the heat, and it will come out again slowly inside. If you insulate on the inside, you run into problems with condensation possibly forming behind the insulation and then running down and rotting timbers, and that sort of, I can explain more about that, but it can cause problems on the inside. Of course, if you insulate on the outside, you can have render. I've got some samples here somewhere. We'll have a look at those at the end, I think. So you can put insulation, different types. I put 60mm of dense polystyrene on my house, with then a thin render, acrylic render on the outside. Very quick and easy to do, and the wall looks great, much better than the old brickwork that was there. Of course, you could use other cladding materials. You could do slate hanging, tile hanging, or boarding, some other means of facing up the insulation that you put on the wall. It depends on the design of your house and how good the brickwork is. Then next, I think, in terms of priority, we come to windows and doors, and now you're really getting into quite expensive stuff to do. So it's really, are your doors and windows at the end of their life? Are you going to replace them anyway? If you do, I would suggest please don't use plastic. We have enough plastic in the world. You know, all of us know by now the problems that plastic causes. If you can possibly buy a durable timber, you can find a close grained timber or a hardwood. I have, in the house that I'm converting, I have what are called composite windows and doors, which have aluminium on the outside, timber on the inside, and there's a thermal barrier between them. And the U value, the insulation value on those is very low indeed. You put your hand on the glass in this cold weather now, it doesn't feel cold at all. They're triple glazed. I even have some quadruple glazed roof lights. There are methods of, if you've got, say, sash windows, there are firms that will improve the thermal performance of sash windows, but again, you're calling in a specialist. Some of it you can do yourself by draft stripping, but the system I've used is you can buy a magnetic strip, which is like it's like double-sided tape in a way. So it's a thin metal strip. One side has adhesive on it, and the other side has a magnet on it. And provided you find a common plane around the window, and that might need a little bit of building out in one place or another, so you've got a common face, you can then buy some glass, put the magnetic strips, put one strip around the window, another strip on the glass, and provided you have an aluminium channel at the top, just in case it falls out, you can then put the glass in, and you've got quite cheap, double glazing, which can be used in listed buildings even, because you're not really changing the building. You need to look at the windows closely when you're dealing with things like that. Then, of course, we come to active measures. All insulation are called passive measures. Active measures include all the sexy stuff that people like solar panels, heat pumps. Please avoid those if you can. Do all the insulation, draft sealing first. But my suggestion is, because all of this can be quite overwhelming, and the route I took with my 1930s house was do a little bit when you can, but if you're redecorating a room, do what you can within that room. So I added, because I already had cavity wall insulation and I had very nice brick outside, I used 50mm of rock wall, rigid rock wall insulation inside. So I brought the walls in 50mm and then put plasterboard on the inside of those. And one thing I did, one of the weakest points you find in houses insulation-wise is when the pitch roof meets the wall. So you have this ceiling that meets the wall, and just there is a very weak point thermally at the eaves of the building. So I put a coffered ceiling in the big rooms, not the tiny rooms, and then filled that gap, that triangle, with insulation. Just another thing you can do. So, make a start is the thing, I think. Okay, I think that's about it, but we'll have a look at some of the samples of materials. Shall we do that now? Yeah? Within walls or new construction or existing walls. This is the dense polystyrene that was used on my wall insulation, and then it was rendered on one side. So it looks, this is a manufacturer's sample here. So it looks something like that. They use a mesh before they render. Look how thin the render is. So you can get different materials, different insulation materials of different thicknesses, basically depending on what energy level you want to reach and how much money you've got, of course. So this is sheep's wool, and this must have had some black sheep in it, look. Because here's some other sheep's wool, and if you can use this in your loft, beware, because you will just lie down on it and fall asleep. It's lovely stuff if you want to have a try. So anyone want to try this? Have a cover. So this is something you don't see very often. This is recycled clothing made into an insulation layer. This is a rigid rock wool, mainly used for sound insulation, actually. But I've used quite a lot of that. I have some slate cladding on the house that I'm doing, and I've used this behind the slate cladding, externally. Other bits of wall. Look, wall comes in different types. This is for wrapping around pipes and that type of thing. So, now this is interesting. This is foam glass, expanded glass. Used on, if you've got some flat roofs, you can put this on the flat roof, which is quite easy to do, and then you weight it down with either an aggregate, ballast, shingles, or paving slabs. It's quite easy to do. Flat roofs, you don't often come across flat roofs, but that can be done. On the extension to the house that I've done, I've used some of this in the foundations, but it actually has columns of resin within it to provide the strength. And insulated foundation is quite rare. So, what else? I think that's possibly about most of it. But do come and have a look at the samples and you know, touch them, see what you think. Okay, I think we're done. Yeah?
And I also give lots and lots of energy advice. So this is a collection of my favourite things. These are the quickest or the easiest and the cheapest things that you can do to save energy. So as I said, we've heard some of them already. I'll go ahead. So the first thing I'd say is to look at your bill and check whether it's right. So we're having a lot of people coming to us, their direct debits have shot up, and we do expect that. So just to give you an idea, so compared with last winter, prices have just about doubled. That's even taking into account the government support that we're getting at the moment. So all our bills are subsidised. Nonetheless, it's just about double. So if your bill feels high, that's probably right, it is high. But if it's more than double than what it was last year, then your supplier may have got that wrong, and they do seem to be being a bit cheeky and putting them up above what they should be doing. So don't accept it. If it seems way too high, it might not be right. I don't know what they're playing at, but they are. They do seem to be nudging them up beyond what they need to be. So I'd say the first step is to check whether your bill is right. We see lots of people who have estimated bills. Because of COVID days, they stopped reading meters during that time. So a lot of people actually haven't had their meter read for 2 years or even more. And so if you get a bill and it's estimated and you haven't read your meter, then potentially no one has come to read your meter for the last 2 years. So it could be totally wrong. So it could be wrong and they've been overestimating all this time and actually they owe you a load of money. That's quite a nice scenario. Or it could be the other way and actually they've been underestimating and you owe them money. Either way, an inaccurate bill is not. It's not a good thing. So I'd recommend taking a meter reading, sending it to your company, or if you can't, let them know. So there's something called the Priority Services Register, and you can be added to that if you can't read your meter. So it might be your mobility, you can't access the meter, anything like that. You can let your supplier know, and then they should send someone round. So the way to know if your bill is accurate or not, have a look at your bill. There's a little section that's got all the maths on it. So this is how many kilowatt hours you've used. And then it will give 2 meter readings, so the starter meter reading, and then the end meter reading, and then it will say you've used, say, 200 kilowatts. And next to the meter readings, it will either say, usually A, which is actual, or it might say your read. Okay, so that's accurate. Or it might say E, which is estimated. Or if you have a smart meter, it might say smart read, that's fine. But if it says estimated, then take your meter reading and compare the two, because if your meter reading is a lot higher or a lot lower than the one in your bill, then you're paying either too much or too little. The second thing to have a look at is whether you're in credit. So at this time of year, it's not so relevant because you do want some credit. So if you pay by direct debit, the idea is you have your annual bill, and they predict that, and then it's divided by 12 and you have your regular monthly amount. So over the summer, essentially you overpay in order to build up credit for the winter, and that sort of sees you through. So if you've got a bit of credit now, that's a good thing. If, however, you reach the end of winter and you've got some credit there, then you're overpaying. So again, you should talk to your supplier and lower your amount. Or if you have an online account, you can log in and generally you can lower your direct debits yourself without having to bother to talk to them. One thing just to note, you can ask your direct debit to be lowered. So direct debits are you paying in advance for your energy. Actually, you only need to pay them as you would when you get a quarterly bill. So you can lower your direct debit, and when you get your quarterly bill, then you may need to pay them a bit more. But actually, you can lower your direct debit, so there's lots of people that just cannot afford to go as high as they're being asked to. You can set it, you can say to them, I can't afford that, I want to pay this, and at some point, obviously, you're going to have to think of what to do if you owe them more. The other thing that I've noticed for quite a few people is has anyone got an economy 7 meter? Okay, do you want to explain what it is?
Yeah, it's what we inherited when we bought the house about 17 years ago. So basically you get a cheap rate and then a more expensive rate. It's cheaper basically in the night, the times vary slightly from the summer to the winter. So if you've got something like a washing machine, always put it on a timer and do it in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so quite a few people have economy 7 meters, and they're designed for if you've got storage heaters. So storage heaters heat up during the night, they use the cheaper rate of electricity, and then they let out that heat in the daytime. If you don't have storage heaters and you don't have an electric car, so you're not using lots and lots of electricity at night, then it's very likely that an economy 7 tariff is not the best for you. This might be the case for you.
Can you change it?
Yes, you don't even have to get a new meter, so they might do that if they want, change it to a smart meter anyway. You don't have to. What they can do is they can just get the daytime usage, the nighttime usage, add them up and just give you a normal single rate. So unless you use 40% of your energy at night or more, then an economy 7 tariff is not best for you because the daytime rate is so much more expensive than like a standard daytime. So have a look. And it is, when people inherit them, and you wouldn't know that, but it seems to come up a fair bit.
No, I just thought we were stuck with it because that's what the house had.
Yeah, no, talk to your supplier. You can ask to go onto a single rate, and they'll let you know if it will work, if it will be giving you a saving. For people on prepay meters, another relatively common problem is you move into a place, topping up this meter, it seems to be taking an awful lot of credit every time you top up. We've had lots of clients that paid for the previous person's debt. So there is a way to check that. So on the meter itself, you can click through the screens and it will tell you how much it's taking for debt each week and how much debt is left to pay. It really happens a lot. So especially for someone that's just moved in and it's like, why am I suddenly seeming to be spending so much? It's really worth knowing that information is on the meter itself. You do not have to pay someone else's debt. So if you move into a property and you've got a prepay meter, it's got someone's debt on, you let the supplier know. You start an account, they can chase the last person for it, but it's not your responsibility. And then the same thing, if you have a prepay meter, just check, is it an economy 7 meter? Are there 2 meter readings, a daytime and a nighttime? And if so, do you really need that style of tariff? So Dominic has already given us these tips. I'll just reiterate them. These are lovely, quick and easy wins. So if you're ever out in the community or doing outreach, these are three really good things to highlight, because someone could go home, they could spend 5 minutes wandering around the house, making these little adjustments, and they could save nearly £300. So Dominic said about the thermostat, a healthy temperature is between 17 and 24, with optimal being 18 to 21. And obviously, if people are older or have health conditions, you want to go at the 21. So if you're healthy, you can go more down to 18. And as Dominic said, every degree you turn it down will save around £100. And so just that 1 degree, so if you have your house at 20, trying to get it to 19, you won't really notice. Lovely, easy win. And it is surprising, like a lot of people do have this temperature quite high, or use the temperature to get the heating on, so like whack it right up to sort of 27 to get the boiler working, and then obviously it's working so hard and it'll be really costly. So using the timer rather than the thermostat as control to get it on and off. The other thing is this boiler flow, which is like the tip of the moment. So if any of you get the Money Saving Expert newsletter, then people love this because it's something we haven't heard of before, and it's another sort of very satisfying. So if I go to my friend's house or family's house, I'll do this for them as like my gift. It's £100 for you. So there's, I gave my daughters this information sheet and I gave them it to staple, and I forgot to get it off them. The web address is up there. Worth including in the Green Party newsletter, let people know about it. Essentially, you're turning down the temperature of that goes through the radiators. So all boilers are different. The wonderful thing about this little website is that it will take you through step by step for your boiler. So I'll say, does your boiler look like this? Like 2 dials. Does it look like this LED screen? And then you can select which one it is. You're still in front of it, and it tells you what to do. Because it is quite intimidating to adjust the control, especially if you're renting, you're not sure if you don't want to break it. So I say to people, take a photo first, so you can see where it started, and then do your thing, and then if you do completely panic or you feel like you're broken, you can just switch it back. But there's no reason to be scared of the controls. They are there to be adjusted. And this website is so good because it really does take you through step by step. Another saving, over £100, totally easy. You will not notice it, and you will notice no difference. So the website recommends switching the radiator temperature down to 60. You can also do the same with the hot water temperature. So if when you run a bath, you then add a load of cold water, you don't actually need your boiler working that hard to that temperature. You're having to dilute it anyway. So you can turn it down to 60, 55. Don't turn it down below that because of regions. But you can do both of them, and that will be a decent saving. And then just adjusting the TRVs, which are the thermostatic radiator valves on the radiators. So in your living room, you want that nice and high. That's where you are. You've sat down watching TV or whatever it is. In the guest room, maybe no one's there, so I recommend turning it right down but not off, just so that you don't get a very cold room, which might then end up in damp problems. So there's lots of people at the moment with damp problems. Unfortunately, we'll see it even more because we're going to have very cold rooms that attract the moisture in the air, and unfortunately we'll have a load of damp problems. So I recommend just turning them right down but not totally off. These are some appliances in our house that are very energy hungry. Let's take a guess. So how much do you think, what I've done is average usage. So tumble dryer drying for 2 hours, how much do you think that costs you on average? Take a guess. 30p, any higher, lower?
£2.
A little more like it, okay, you split. There we are, £2.13. So they're really expensive. Tumble dryers are an absolute nightmare. I'm going to go on after this page and I'm going to show you some alternatives. The next one, take a guess. So an electric oven, and it's baking your nice baked potato. It takes about an hour to do that. How much would you think it would cost you? Pound? Higher, lower?
Higher.
80? You're pretty
You're
Look at this. Let's reveal the answer. 71p. Pretty good. Obviously, these are all averages. It depends on the wattage of your appliance, but this would just give you an idea. The next one, the fan heater. So Dominic, I had made the same mistake with you with the little electric heater. I had electric sort of plug-in radiator thing, and then I got a smart meter, and I was like, ooh! And this was like 2 years ago. So these little plug-in heaters that you think, oh, it's only that big, it would be much cheaper than switching the radiators on. They were an absolute nightmare. So for 2 hours, what do you think that fan heater would cost you?
£5.
£5, okay. Be glad to know it's not that.
You'll be relieved.
Yeah. I'm going to review it. £1.70. But if you think about if you had that on while you were working from home 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, it would really be a very big cost. The shower.
60p.
Very sharp.
50. People take 15-minute showers. One of our advisors spoke to someone who took a shower for an hour and a half. And he said he's cut it down to 40 minutes, but he was a very hairy man, so he couldn't do less. Do you want to reveal that one? It's really expensive. And when I speak to people that have got high energy bills, I go through my sort of usual suspects, like immersion heater. Then I say, have you got teenagers? Do they have long showers? If you've got multiple teenagers, if you think about it, 77p times 3 people or 4 people every day, it's a really, really big cost just for people to pay. And then with the fridge, I put an F-rated one. So all appliances have energy ratings on them. They've fairly recently been changed because they've gone a bit crazy. They were sort of A+, so they brought it all down and it goes from A to G to try to be simplified. So this is an F-rated one. And how much do you think it would cost you for the year? Because obviously it's plugged in the whole time. 20? 30?
50.
50? Okay, so it's sort of between you two. 71. It's expensive. And if you think you usually have that, then you'd have potentially another freezer. A lot of people have extra freezers, I've noticed. Lots of chest freezers around. Lots of problems with chest freezers. Okay, so now I'm just going to suggest some alternatives that are a bit cheaper to run. Go to the next page. So I was looking into clothes drying, so I think it's a real problem. So we always tell people, if you haven't got tumble dryer, don't put them on the radiators. Causes all sorts of problems. But actually, what on earth are you meant to do if your clothes don't dry in your house, which they don't?
No, the best thing, if you've got, say, an older house with a sort of nice high ceiling, is to get, I think they're called Sheila made, the one where you hang them from the ceiling and you've got 4 long bars and you have them on a little pulley and you can get bath towels, bedding, they're amazing.
Yeah, so you get an air to them. It's a real problem, and I really feel for people. So, like with the housing association, there'll be damp and mould, and they'll say, "Are you drying your clothes on the radiator?" Well, it's your fault. But it's actually because if they try and dry it on a dryer, it takes 3 days. The clothes smell, and so we need to think of realistic alternatives for people. So I was looking into it, like what is the cheapest way that actually dries your clothes, rather than just telling people to dry them inside when it doesn't always work. So I found this quite good tip, which is using a dehumidifier to dry it. So, and it would take around 6 hours. So I tried to sort of compare the 2-hour load in the tumble dryer to 6 hours with the dehumidifier. How much would you imagine that would cost? I mean, take a random guess.
50p.
Yeah, not too bad. Let's do that. 44p. So compared with that £2.13 for the tumble dryer, there's still a cost. It's still going to cost you. But 1, it's a lot cheaper, and 2, it's taking the moisture out of the air. So especially if someone's having problems with damp and mould, they've been drying it on the radiator, this might be quite a good alternative because you're not going to get those same problems. The next alternative, so microwaves, they're having a moment, along with air fryers, people are going mad about them, slow cookers, all of these alternatives to using expensive, especially electric ovens. How much do you think it would take to microwave your baked potato? So take 5 minutes to cook it.
10p.
Any higher or lower?
15.
15? Wow, let me tell you. Bargain. 2p. I know. You can do lots of them. So microwave is a really efficient way of cooking. But obviously it depends. If you had a whole family, if you had say 6 people and you happen to do individual potatoes, then you need to add up. But it's quite good to know that it really is an affordable way to cook.
Paige, it's worth also pointing out with the air fryer that actually they really only work if there are fewer people. Because
Yes.
they've got a limited capacity,
Yeah.
so if you're having to use it.
Has anyone got an air fryer? Oh, at the back. People love them. Do you like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got one, so. Yeah, I mean, they're praised and they're low energy, so I think they're probably quite a good option, as are slow cookers as well at the moment. So, the other thing I was trying to look at for our clients is, as you were saying, Dominic, at the end, some people are going to go without heat this winter, and it's awful, but it's true. They cannot afford their heating, especially if you're on a prepaid meter where you're having to pay the total cost of your energy that you're using at that moment in time. So with a direct debit, you're staggering it over the 12 months and you're paying a bit in advance in the summer. But if you have a prepaid meter, you're having to pay the total cost. And in January of next year, that will be paying nearly £400 if you were to use a normal amount of heating. So it's a horrendous amount, so lots of people will be going without heat. So I was trying to find what is a realistic alternative that we can send to our energy advice clients so that they can stay warm at least. And this was the best option that I found. So rather than those plug-in heaters, we did used to give them, if people were without heat, we used to give those plug-in heaters as emergency heating. We don't, because they're so expensive unless the person wants one, and instead we're sending out these heated throws. How much do you think that would cost for the 2 hours?
10p.
Really close, yeah. So it's 8p. Okay, so we don't want people buying more stuff, and we don't want more plastic and stuff. But if someone is going to go without heat, then I think this is a good option. And then recommending that people reduce their shower to 5 minutes rather than the 15. That would be a decent saving. 2 minutes, wow. You haven't got. Makes it quicker. Yeah. And then this just shows you the contrast with, so if you're picking an appliance, and again, don't chuck something out for the sake of it. We don't want stuff, but your fridge breaks, you need to buy a new one. It's really, really worth looking at the energy rating for it. So if we just, how much do you think it would cost for the year? Okay.
I know what you put that.
Oh, there. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, so it's almost less than half. Obviously, it's much more expensive. It's really frustrating because it's much more expensive to access these things, which are then cheaper to run. So if you have upfront cash, you can access sort of lower running costs. Same with the tumble dryer. I've just bought a tumble dryer that's a heat pump one, and it's much, much cheaper to run, but you have to have, well, it wasn't super expensive, but it was, a bit more expensive than a conventional one. Okay, next one. Just a quick bit of maths. So I found this really useful. I went on when I did my energy advisor course. It's really great because you can then find out how much anything is costing you. So I won't go into too much detail, but basically this is the maths if you're wondering how much your appliance is costing you. Find out the wattage of it. If it's a new appliance, that'll be very easy. It will be on the packet or on the thing. If it's an old appliance, you might not be able to find it. But if you've got access to that information, find out the wattage. You then want to turn wattage into kilowatts, and you do that by dividing by 1,000. Okay, so our example that we're using is an electric cooker, and it's 2,000 watts. So we're going to divide that by 1,000 to get it into kilowatts. Okay, so 2,000 divided by 1,000 is 2. 2 kilowatts. And then you need to times it by your unit rate, because your unit rate is how much you're being charged for every kilowatt hour of electricity. Okay, at the moment, everyone's probably very similar. It's probably 34p. That's the standard variable rate.
Get a smart meter.
Yes.
I'll tell you what you're
You'll see my next slide. But this is so satisfying because once you've got the maths. So my mother-in-law, she needs to get an electric heater, so she's all electric, and she didn't know which one to get, how much it would cost. You go, okay, well, what's the wattage? This is how much it will cost you. It's actually quite a simple equation. So that gives you how much it's costing you per hour, and obviously you can then work it out from there. If you don't want to do the maths, fair enough, Citizens Advice have a really useful tool, and if you're out on a stall or you're talking to people, you can have this on the laptop. It's really, really good. So it has a list of everyday appliances like your shower, for example, electric shower. Then you can input how many minutes or hours you use it for, and it will tell you how much that costs you per day, per week, and then per year. So it's really quite good in bringing to life like why the bill is what it is, because it is puzzling sometimes when you feel like you don't use that much electricity. Okay, next slide. Like you said, or you can get a smart meter. It's interesting, like a lot of people do not like smart meters. I mean, the rollout was terrible by the government, it was an absolute mess. But for this moment in time, I think they're so useful because you know exactly where you are, you know your bills are useful, are actual and not estimated. If you have a costly appliance, you'll know about it quite quickly, like when I realised how much that heater was costing me. If you have a malfunctioning appliance, as sometimes happens with these chest freezers it seems, then you'll see on that. So I really like smart meters for this moment in time. I encourage my clients to get it. There's all sorts of worries about radiation and things like that. People can make up their own mind on that. Radiation-wise, it's about the same as a mobile phone, so we've, but I think they're really, really useful, and then you know where you are. And in terms of the DIY stuff we can do, so draft proofing is easy win. We have these that go on the bottom of the doors. There's the draft proofing tape, which you can take around windows and doors. And don't forget the service points. So, for example, underneath the sink, where you have the pipes that go in and out of the house, I did a home visit to someone, and the kitchen was very, very cold. And when you opened the cupboard underneath the sink, basically a massive hole to the outside where the pipes were, so you can fill that with some expandable foam. And as Dominic said, the chimney, if you have a chimney and you don't use it, then that will save around £90. So yeah, no, £90, so that's a real money saver. Okay, next slide. The other big win, if anyone here has an immersion heater or a hot water tank, even if it has already that foam, which most of them do, it's still worth adding a layer of this. You're welcome to take it if someone has one. All they cost around £30. And then these radiator reflectors, so about 50% of the heat from the radiator goes into the wall, and obviously you're just heating up that wall. So if it's a wall to the outside, especially, you've got a cold wall that's just heating up. So these go behind the radiator. It will take you a few minutes to install them, and they just stop that heat loss into the wall. This is a temporary secondary glazing, so it's good for around here, lots of single glazing. This is similar to fencing with the glass, except for it's very temporary, so it's like a cling film essentially. You stick it around the windows, you use a hairdryer, it goes nice and taut, and then that creates a temporary secondary glazing effect. Also, if you have any pipe work, that's worth doing as well. Okay. And just to say that we've started doing energy advice in Bexhill, so we're here every Tuesday. There's a new climate hub in the mall, apparently. It's one of our other advisors that does that, and so you can promote that, people can come down, we give all this stuff out for free, and then we help people look at all the ways they can save money on their bills, that they can save energy, and they can either make an appointment with us or they can just walk in. Okay.